Tonight we explore the dark legacies of men who wore the papal crown, not to guide souls, but to dominate, exploit, and deceive. From orgies in the Vatican to alliances with assassins, the worst popes in history remind us that not every man who sat on the throne of St. Peter was a saint. Some were tyrants, some were perverts, some were killers in robes. So take a moment to like and subscribe only if you enjoy this kind of story. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Some nights we aim to put you to sleep with peaceful tales, but not tonight. Tonight is about betrayal in silk robes. Dim the lights, turn on a fan for soft white noise, and settle in. Our first tale begins with Pope John XII, the teen pope of sin. He was just 18 when he became the most powerful religious figure in the Western world. A boy crowned pope, with no experience, no spiritual depth, and no desire to lead a holy life. John XII, born Octavianus, inherited the papacy in 955 thanks to his father Alberic II of Spalato, who installed him on his deathbed. But what followed wasn't sacred devotion. It was scandal, violence, and unrestrained vice. John didn't view the papacy as a divine mission. He saw it as a kingdom for personal indulgence. He treated the church like a game. Roman historians accused him of turning the Lateran Palace into a brothel. Prostitutes wandered the holy halls. Sacred relics were pawned off to fund his pleasures. Instead of preaching the gospel, he toasted pagan gods during feasts and gambled with bishops. His actions didn't just break moral codes. They shattered alliances, especially with the Holy Roman Emperor Otto I. Their fragile alliance collapsed when John XII secretly negotiated with Otto's enemies. Otto responded by marching into Rome and forcing a synod to investigate the Pope. The accusations were jaw-dropping: simony, murder, incest, and invoking demons. John was deposed, but not for long. With help from Roman mobs, he returned, mutilated his enemies, executed opposing bishops, and sank deeper into cruelty. Then, just as suddenly as he rose, he was gone. In 964, the young pope died under scandalous and mysterious circumstances. One account says he was struck by a jealous husband who found him in bed with his wife. Another claims he suffered a stroke during adultery. Either way, his reign ended not with dignity, but disgrace. John XII didn't just stain the church. He defiled it with every breath. In the shadow of church history, few names are as cursed. Pope Benedict IX, the man who sold the papacy itself. If John was the most depraved teenager to wear the crown, Benedict was the most corrupt. He was pope not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. Born Theophylactus of Tusculum, he first took the papal throne in 1032 and left behind a legacy that shocked even jaded Rome. He was barely 20, placed on the throne by his noble family, but there was no holiness in his rule. Chroniclers called his reign shameful, accusing him of rape, sorcery, and adultery. He hosted orgies inside Vatican walls and disgusted even corrupt Roman elites. Eventually, a furious rebellion forced him out. But Benedict wasn't finished. He came back, then left again, and returned once more. Then came his most infamous act. Benedict decided to sell the papacy for gold. Yes, he approached his godfather, the archpriest John Gratian, and offered him the throne for a price. Gratian accepted and became Pope Gregory VI, claiming it was to save Rome. But the damage was done. The idea that the papacy could be bought like a trinket tore through Christendom like wildfire. Benedict later changed his mind and tried to reclaim the title. Now, there were 3 men claiming to be pope at the same time. The chaos was unbearable. Emperor Henry III had to intervene, calling a council to restore order. The decision was brutal but necessary. All three popes were removed. The Church was given a clean slate, though the stain of corruption would never fully wash away. Benedict IX was excommunicated not once, not twice, but multiple times depending on which faction held control. He's remembered not only as one of the worst popes, but also as one of the most shameless. He treated the throne of St. Peter like a game of musical chairs. A pope for sale, a soul up for auction. And Rome would never forget it. Our next descent takes us to Pope Alexander VI, the serpent of the Borgia house. If there's one name that dominates any discussion of papal corruption, it's Borgia. Rodrigo Borgia, crowned Pope Alexander VI in 1492, didn't just bring scandal to the Church, he embodied it. From the moment he rose to power, his reign was soaked in bribery, nepotism, and ruthless ambition. He didn't climb through spiritual grace. He bought the highest seat in Christendom with gold and promises. The conclave that elected him was infamous for its secret deals and bribes. Once enthroned, Alexander wasted no time securing wealth and power for his family. His papacy was less about saving souls and more about raising the Borgia dynasty. He openly acknowledged his children, including Caesar and Lucretia, whose names became legends of scandal. Caesar, a cardinal turned warrior, ruled like a mafia don with papal blessing. Lucretia was accused, perhaps unfairly, of incest, poisonings, and seduction. But Alexander himself was no cleaner. Inside the Vatican, he hosted lavish orgies. One of the most infamous was the Banquet of Chestnuts, where dozens of prostitutes entertained noble guests as the Pope looked on. Coins were tossed on the floor, and dancers competed to catch them using anything but their hands. Meanwhile, Alexander sold cardinalships to the highest bidders, turning the Church into a market. Faith became a currency. Yet, he wasn't entirely incompetent. He strengthened papal lands, reformed offices, and funded great works of art. But none of that could cleanse the stench around him. In 1503, he died suddenly, possibly poisoned by mistake while plotting to poison someone else. Even in death, the Borgia name lingered like incense in a ruined chapel. His bloated body reportedly couldn't fit into the coffin, and the burial was rushed and unceremonious. Pope Alexander VI is still remembered as the most scandalous pope in history. He didn't just tarnish the Church, he weaponized it. Under his rule, the Vatican became a theater of lust, blood, and whispered murders. And now, we turn to Pope Stephen VI. Some papal scandals reeked of greed, others of lust. But Pope Stephen VI gave the Church something far stranger, a horror show. In 897, amidst political chaos, Stephen wanted revenge on his predecessor, Pope Formosus. There was just one issue. Formosus was already dead. That didn't stop Stephen. He had the corpse exhumed, dressed in papal robes, and placed on trial in the Lateran Basilica. The rotting body of Formosus sat propped on a throne as Stephen screamed accusations. A deacon was assigned to speak for the corpse, answering charges of perjury, violating canon law, and illegal ascension. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching the grotesque spectacle unfold. The corpse swayed and sagged while Stephen demanded justice. It was surreal, macabre, and tragically real. Stephen found the dead man guilty. Formosus's body was stripped of its robes. His blessing fingers were cut off, and he was tossed into the Tiber River. But this wasn't just madness. It was strategic. By condemning Formosus, Stephen invalidated his appointments and cleared space for loyal bishops. Yet the horror sparked outrage. The people of Rome, appalled by the desecration, rose in anger. Riots erupted. Stephen was imprisoned and soon strangled in his cell by enemies. The Church tried to erase the shame, both literally and symbolically. Formosus's body was recovered and reburied with dignity. Later, popes overturned Stephen's rulings and banned future corpse trials. But the damage had been done. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the darkest, strangest moments in papal history. Pope Stephen VI's legacy is not one of faith, doctrine, or leadership. It is the image of a rotting corpse on trial, a moment that turned the Vatican into a theatre of the absurd. Even in death, the papacy was not safe from vengeance. Now we turn to Pope Urban VI, the tyrant in white. While others cloaked sin in charm, Urban made no effort to hide his cruelty. His reign was one of fury, fear, and blood. His rule began in 1378 and was marked not by scandal in shadows, but by open hostility and paranoia. Chosen by frightened cardinals to appease Roman mobs, Bartolomeo Pregnano became Urban VI. They soon regretted it. He rejected advice, shouted at cardinals in public, and reportedly beat staff over small mistakes. He didn't rule with an iron fist. He ruled with clenched teeth and wild, unblinking eyes. His fear turned violent. He believed his own cardinals plotted against him. When several tried to flee his wrath, he had them arrested and tortured. Eyewitnesses spoke of screams echoing through the Vatican halls. Some were beaten to the brink of death. Others were left to starve. 5 were executed without trial. Urban's reign became a fortress of terror. And yet, the worst was still to come. His madness split the Church. Cardinals fled and crowned a rival pope, Clement VII, in Avignon. The result was a catastrophe, the Western Schism. For nearly 40 years, Europe had 2, sometimes 3 popes at once. Kings picked sides. Faith fractured. The unity of Christendom slowly dissolved. Urban made no peace. He tightened his grip and let the Church splinter beneath him. He excommunicated rivals and surrounded himself with loyal thugs. As his sanity faded, so did the dignity of his office. He alienated allies, stirred chaos in Rome, and stained the papacy with fear. He died in 1389, alone and despised. Though the schism outlasted him, it was his madness that ignited the fire. Urban VI was not just a failed pope. He was the spark that cracked a continent's soul. He wasn't merely corrupt. He was a tyrant in holy robes, and his shadow stretched far beyond his grave. Our next descent lands in the Renaissance. Pope Leo X, the prince who bankrupted salvation. When Giovanni de' Medici became pope in 1513, he wasn't stepping into a church. He was ascending a throne. Born into luxury, Leo treated the Vatican as a stage, and the world as his audience. God has given us the papacy. Let us enjoy it, he once said, and enjoy it he did. Under Leo X, the Vatican gleamed with gold. Banquets lasted for days. Raphael adorned walls with beauty. Poetry, music, and theatre flourished. But behind the silk curtains of culture, the treasury drained. Art had a price, and Leo paid it with the soul of the Church. He needed money, so he sold forgiveness. When funds ran dry, Leo sanctioned the sale of indulgences, papers that claimed to erase punishment for sin. Priests proclaimed, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. It worked. Gold poured in. But so did rage. In 1517, a monk named Martin Luther nailed his protests to a church door in Wittenberg. His words weren't just ink, they were dynamite. How did Leo respond? He mocked Luther, calling him a drunken German who'd change his mind when sober. He didn't. So Leo excommunicated him. That decision lit a fire. The Reformation exploded. Entire nations broke from Rome. The Church was no longer one. Unity shattered not through war or heresy, but through greed and pride. Leo never saw it coming. He mistook protest for noise. To Leo, the Church was a stage, and he was the star. But the stage collapsed. He died in 1521, drowning in debt and unaware of the storm he had unleashed. Today, he is remembered less for the art he funded and more for the fractures he caused. A Medici prince who mistook luxury for salvation. A performer in robes. And a pope who let Europe slip through his jeweled fingers. Next, Pope Sergius III, father of the pornocracy. Long before Renaissance decadence or Borgia scandal, there was a pope who set the standard for corruption. His name was Sergius III, and his reign in the early 10th century began what historians now call the pornocracy, the rule of harlots. Sergius became pope in 904 after a bloody power struggle where rivals were killed. In those days, the papacy wasn't sacred. It was a prize in a ruthless Roman game, and Sergius played to win. His ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness. But what defined his papacy wasn't just violence. It was his affair with a noble woman named Marozia of the Theophylact family, Rome's true rulers at the time. Chroniclers claim Sergius took her as his mistress while she was still a teenager. Together, they had a child who would later wear the papal crown himself as Pope John XI. Yes, a pope fathered another pope. The Roman clergy whispered. The people muttered. But no one dared speak too loudly. Sergius ruled through fear, not reverence. He even revived the memory of Pope Formosus, the same pope who was tried as a corpse, only to condemn him again and bury him without honor. Under Sergius, papal power became a tool of personal revenge and public spectacle. He packed the curia with loyalists, sold church offices, and presided over what may be the darkest moral chapter in church history. The Vatican, once a beacon of faith, became a den of incestuous politics and whispered betrayals. Under his hand, holiness became a commodity. Sergius died in 911, still in power, still feared, but utterly unloved. His reign cracked the foundation of the papacy itself. Pope Sergius III may lack the infamy of Borgia or Medici names, but he ushered in nearly 60 years of papal rule by one Roman family. Seduction, manipulation, and bloodline shaped the Church. He was not just a corrupt pope, he was the architect of dynastic rot. Next came Pope Boniface VIII, who saw himself as more than a man. When he rose to power in 1294, he believed he was God's voice made flesh. His predecessor had resigned, an act of rare humility. Boniface had none. He viewed the papal seat not as service, but dominion. "I am Caesar, I am emperor," he once said. But his true ambition was written in a document called Unum Tam. In it, Boniface declared that submission to the Pope was necessary for salvation. He placed himself above kings, above emperors, above all creation. He tried to enforce this vision, clashing directly with Philip IV of France. But Philip was no puppet. He was sharp, vengeful, and enraged by papal interference in French taxation. Boniface issued edicts. Philip responded with accusations of heresy, corruption, and even sorcery. Tension escalated until it exploded in a way never before seen in papal history. In 1303, a group of armed men loyal to Philip stormed Boniface's residence in Anagai. They slapped him across the face, a literal insult to papal dignity. He was held captive for 3 days, mocked and abused. Though later released, Boniface never recovered. He died soon after, either from illness or from humiliation that broke his mind. But even death could not silence the fury he provoked. Years later, his body was exhumed by enemies who claimed it stank of sulfur, a symbolic accusation of damnation. When Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, he placed Boniface in the 8th circle of hell, among corrupt churchmen. Boniface VIII believed himself untouchable. In reaching for divinity, he nearly shattered the office he tried to elevate. Pride, not heresy, was his downfall. His legacy is a warning. Power without humility breeds disaster. Next, we turn to Pope Innocent III, crowned in 1198. Don't be misled by the name. He was one of the most powerful popes in history, and one of the most dangerous. Unlike those who fell to personal temptation, Innocent craved control. His chosen weapon wasn't gold or pleasure, it was fire. His reign was defined by crusade. Under Innocent's rule, the papacy became an empire of swords. He launched the Fourth Crusade, supposedly to reclaim Jerusalem. But the Crusaders never reached the Holy Land. Instead, in 1204, they turned on Constantinople, the Christian capital of Byzantium. They looted churches, raped nuns, and stole holy relics in the name of God. It wasn't just a military failure, it was a betrayal of the sacred. Innocent claimed outrage, but his rebuke came too late. The Crusaders had already sent him gifts looted from Christian altars. Worse was the Albigensian Crusade. This time, the enemy wasn't in the east, but in southern France. The Cathars, a Christian sect labeled heretics, had challenged papal authority. Innocent didn't send scholars, he sent knights. His message was simple and chilling. Kill them all, God will sort them out. In 1209, the city of Béziers fell. When soldiers asked how to identify heretics, the answer came swiftly: kill everyone. Over 20,000 people were slaughtered, men, women, and children. Under Innocent III, the Church declared war on its own. Heresy was met not with debate, but with extermination. And in that blood-soaked soil, the seeds of the Inquisition began to grow. He centralized church power and reshaped canon law. But his legacy is soaked in blood. Pope Innocent III didn't just command the church, he transformed it into a weapon. His crusades, launched under banners of purity and salvation, remain some of the darkest stains in Christian history. Far away, where the sands of Iraq now lie silent, another tale begins. One not of swords or saints, but of wonder, Babylon. A city of ziggurats and scribes, priests and kings. Babylon rose beneath stars that watched in silence. And at its heart, so the story goes, bloomed a garden that defied reason. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. A paradise suspended in air, layered on terraces, bursting with life. Palm trees brushed the sky. Myrrh scented the breeze. Vines spilled from balconies like green waterfalls, untouched by the desert heat. Water flowed through stone channels, trickling down walls and feeding fruit trees that had no business growing in such a climate. To see it, they said, was to witness a mountain of gardens, a man-made Eden. It challenged the laws of nature. It was a miracle of engineering, a triumph of imagination, and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But behind the wonder lies a lingering question: did it ever really exist? No Babylonian tablet mentions the gardens. No ruins confirm their presence. No inscriptions say, "Here it stood." All we have are later Greek and Roman accounts, like those of Strabo and Philo of Byzantium, writing from a distance of centuries. Their words glow with awe, but not with certainty. The silence of Babylon's own records raises doubt, yet the legend refuses to die. Could something so breathtaking have vanished? Or worse, have never been real? Still, the story endures. Perhaps because it's too beautiful to abandon. A king building a garden for his queen, who longed for her distant homeland. A gift of love rising from the desert. That image, whether true or not, has taken root in our imagination and refuses to wither. It lives in poems and paintings, in myths and dreams. Perhaps beneath the ruins, roots still wait in silence. The hanging gardens may be lost, or they may never have existed. But the mystery is alive. To understand the gardens, we must know the city said to cradle them. Babylon, stretched along the Euphrates, was no ordinary city. It was a symbol carved into the soil of Mesopotamia. Its walls were so wide that chariots raced atop them. Its temples reached the sky. The Ishtar Gate, deep blue and adorned with lions and dragons, stood as its jewel. Babylon was the crown of Mesopotamia, the pride of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and at its heart ruled King Nebuchadnezzar II, the man most often credited with building the Hanging Gardens. He reigned in the 6th century BCE as a builder and a conqueror. Under Nebuchadnezzar's rule, Babylon rose to unmatched grandeur, with ziggurats and palaces that scraped the sky. But among the temples and triumphs, one story stands apart. Greek historians whispered that the king married a woman from Media, perhaps Queen Amytis, who longed for the green hills of her homeland. But in Babylon, she found only dust, stone, and desert winds. So the king built her a garden, not just a courtyard or grove, but a towering marvel of terraces and trees that mimicked her distant forests. A living memory of home, crafted from soil and love. A miracle in a wasteland. This tale feels almost too perfect, yet it survives. And perhaps that's the point. Some stories are too tender to abandon. Greek historians like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus described the gardens centuries later. They wrote of sky-high terraces, of vines and shade, and of machines that lifted water from the Euphrates. Their accounts glow with confidence, but they never saw it. Their words came from rumor, from travelers' tales, from echoes of something half-remembered. So was it real, or the ancient world's most beautiful lie? In a city like Babylon, ruled by a king who bent landscapes to his will, it isn't hard to believe. Perhaps something extraordinary once bloomed there, a dream of stone and water. If the Hanging Gardens were real, they weren't just beautiful. They were proof that even dust can flower with enough love and ingenuity. Imagine building a mountaintop forest in the heart of a desert. Not just shrubs, but tall trees, vines, and flowering canopies. Suspended on stone, under a brutal sun, without rain or hills to build upon. To keep such life alive, the Babylonians would have needed more than faith. They would have needed brilliance. Ancient accounts hint at how it was done. They wrote of terraces built on vaulted stone foundations, sealed with baked brick and asphalt. Deep soil beds allowed trees to root. But the true marvel wasn't the structure. It was the water. How did they lift it without modern pumps? The answer may lie in the Archimedean screw, or something like it. A spiral device that raised water through rotation, turned by hand or foot. If such technology existed in Babylon, and some scholars believe it did, then water could flow continuously, feeding the gardens tier by tier. Each level watered the one below. But such a system couldn't run on myth. It had to be maintained, cleaned, repaired, protected. This was no decoration. It was a living machine, humming beneath leaves and blossoms. Stone channels wound through roots. Gutters hid beneath flower beds. Workers tended pipes as carefully as plants. And from the outside, none of it showed. The garden breathed, it shimmered. To ancient eyes, it must have looked like magic. A floating forest born from engineering and longing. A thing no other city dared to dream, let alone build. But today, Archaeologists ask harder questions. Could this have truly existed in 6th century Babylon? Or are we underestimating ancient genius? Maybe that's the true miracle. That somewhere in sun-baked Mesopotamia, someone looked at dust and dreamed of trees, and then made them grow. Still, no matter how wondrous the tale, there is a silence at its core. That silence has haunted historians. Greek and Roman writers sang its praises, but Babylonian records say nothing. No tablets mention it. No royal inscriptions describe it. No blueprints, no scribes, no carved bricks. And this is strange. The Babylonians documented everything: crops, gods, buildings, taxes, the names of architects, but not this. Not one word. Yet nowhere in Babylonian records do we find a single line confirming a massive garden rising above the city. Nebuchadnezzar II, the king most often credited with its creation, left thousands of inscriptions. He spoke of temples, walls, and palaces, but never of a wonder made for his queen. No mention of terraces. No whisper of a suspended Eden. And in history, silence can be louder than stone. One theory shifts the setting entirely. It suggests the gardens were in Nineveh, capital of Assyria. There, King Sennacherib left inscriptions describing lush gardens, intricate aqueducts, and devices to lift water high. Perhaps Greek writers, distanced by time and translation, confused cities. Mesopotamia was vast. Even scholars sometimes misplace their marvels. Or maybe the gardens never existed at all. Not physically. Perhaps they were always a metaphor, born from longing and retold, until memory hardened into myth. A paradise penned by distant writers who sought to astonish. But myths carry meaning. Even in Babylon's silence, a mystery remains. A space where wonder grows, not from fact, but from yearning, planted deep in the human soul. Though Babylon's records are silent, Greek historians spoke with passion. One of the most quoted accounts comes from Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE. He never saw the gardens, but relayed stories from earlier sources. He described terraces layered skyward, supported by stone columns, and greenery suspended above the city like a vision from a dream. Strabo wrote of water drawn from the Euphrates by unknown machines, perhaps an early water screw. He imagined a garden so vast and elevated it truly seemed to hang in air. Diodorus Siculus, another Greek writer, offered more. He described trees rooted in deep soil, wide walkways, hidden channels, and a structure so grand that even chariots could pass through its shaded paths. According to Diodorus, a king built the gardens for a homesick queen. Both authors painted the same picture, a mountain not of rock but of life, a palace of flowers rising from dust. And they were not alone. Many Greek and Roman writers echoed this tale, yet none had seen it. Their words were inherited, not witnessed. Second-hand accounts from a fading world. By the time these men wrote, Babylon had already begun to vanish. Its walls crumbled, its towers fell. What remained were memories. Rumors passed along the edges of empire. Were their words echoes of truth, or the shadows of stories too beautiful to die? The line between legend and history is thin, and sometimes it disappears altogether. To the Greeks, who revered balance, beauty, and order, a verdant tower in the desert felt like divine art, a harmony of man and nature. Whether real or imagined, the tale was irresistible. So it endured, copied, translated, retold. The Hanging Gardens were granted a place among the Seven Wonders, a title born not only of stone, but of the human need to believe in what could have been. Some wonders survive, not because we prove them, but because the world feels richer if they are true. If the gardens weren't in Babylon, where were they? In the 20th century, a new theory took shape. Dr. Stephanie Daly, a British Assyriologist, challenged the long-standing view. She didn't deny the gardens. She redirected them away from Babylon toward the north. After years of research, Dr. Stephanie Daly proposed something bold. The gardens were real, but not in Babylon. She claimed they stood in Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire. Farther north, along the Tigris River, its king, Sennacherib, ruled in the 7th century BCE, nearly a century before Nebuchadnezzar. And, unlike Babylon, Sennacherib left behind detailed records carved in clay. In his inscriptions, he described a vast palace garden filled with exotic plants and trees. He spoke of an aqueduct stretching 50 kilometers from the mountains, and a device to raise water, an early screw pump. The same technology the Greeks later linked to the Hanging Gardens. If true, his words offer not fiction, but first-hand evidence of a wonder lost in translation. Could the Greeks have been describing Nineveh, not Babylon? Daly also noted that the word Babylon wasn't exclusive. In some Mesopotamian contexts, it referred to sacred gate cities, not one place alone. By that logic, Nineveh may have been called Babylon too. The gardens might never have moved, only the name did. And with it, centuries of misunderstanding followed. This theory doesn't erase the gardens. It relocates them. It explains Babylon's silence and Nineveh's confidence. It suggests the wonder was real, just misplaced. If true, then Sennacherib, not Nebuchadnezzar, was the builder, and that single shift reshapes one of history's oldest mysteries. Because sometimes legends don't vanish. They simply wait in the wrong city, patient and proud. They wait in misread lines and forgotten names until someone sees them clearly again. Beyond the bricks and aqueducts, beyond all the scholarly debate, the Hanging Gardens are also a love story. According to tradition, Nebuchadnezzar didn't build them for glory or gods. He built them for his queen. For Ametis, a woman far from home, whose heart longed for hills lost to memory. Ametis was said to be a princess from Media, a land of cool winds and green slopes. When she married into the Babylonian court, she entered a world of dust and sun, flatlands and heat. The legend says she grew sorrowful, and Nebuchadnezzar, seeing her grief, answered it not with conquest, but with creation. He ordered a garden to rise from the earth like a gift carved in stone. He called on builders and engineers to craft a mountain in the city's heart, not from rock alone, but from roots and water. A monument to memory, a place of green in a world of clay. No tablets mention her name, no records confirm her sadness. But the story survives, because even without proof, it feels true. Some tales endure not by fact, but by the ache they carry, because we can believe it. We want to believe it. That, in a city of conquest, something was made not to rule, but to soothe. A quiet rebellion of beauty. The Hanging Gardens become more than stone. They become a love letter in leaves. A secret act of tenderness in a world shaped by war. Even if they never existed, the longing that built them still does. So if they were real, what happened to them? Great wonders often disappear, not in fire, but in silence. Slowly, without fanfare. Time doesn't always break things. Sometimes it buries them. Babylon, once the jewel of empires, was no exception. It withstood centuries of change, but every empire fades. Even brick turns to dust when no one remembers its name. After the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the city passed from hand to hand. Persians, Greeks, Parthians, each new ruler stripped away a little more of its splendor. Babylon's bricks were carted off to build elsewhere. Temples crumbled, Sand drifted in and swallowed the walls. By the time Alexander the Great arrived in the 4th century BCE, Babylon was already a shadow. By the time Alexander reached it, Babylon was a fading echo. He dreamed of restoring it, making it the capital of his empire. But death claimed him before that dream took form. Without a patron, the city decayed. No one knows when the gardens vanished. They may have been dismantled, collapsed from neglect, or perhaps never stood at all, only alive in stories too perfect to question. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists uncovered Babylon's great ziggurats and palace ruins, but no definitive trace of the gardens appeared. The absence is palpable, like the missing shade of a tree long fallen. Even if the gardens once towered in stone, they now bloom in memory, a different kind of truth, one shaped by longing, legend, and the hunger for beauty. We searched not just for bricks or pipes, but for proof that such wonder was possible, that humanity, even in its earliest days, dreamed upward. What haunts us isn't that they vanished, it's that they might never have existed. Yet still we believe, because the mind, like the desert, holds space where forgotten things can bloom again. The hanging gardens, real or not, live in a rare space. We have no stones to touch, no carvings to study, yet they endure as one of the world's greatest wonders. Why? Because some marvels don't live in mortar, they live in imagination. A skyward garden blooming in dry earth, lifted by clever hands and crowned in green, speaks to something deeper than history. It speaks to our desire to create joy where it shouldn't grow, to tame stone, to coax beauty from heat. Whether built by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, Sennacherib in Nineveh, or simply dreamed by poets, the gardens remind us of ancient hope. In lands shaped by walls and war, someone imagined waterfalls and flowers. That vision alone makes them unforgettable. And isn't that enough? Artists still paint them. Writers still write them. Engineers sketch them into air. Filmmakers render them in glowing scenes. No living person has seen the gardens, yet we all feel as if we have. We picture cool stone underfoot, the scent of jasmine, the hush of flowing water. A garden not built to conquer, but to be remembered. We chase ruins and argue over texts, because we want it to be real. But maybe it already is. Not in the ground, but in us. The hanging gardens have lived more than 2,000 years in memory, passed from voice to voice. They hang still, not above Babylon, but above us all, suspended in thought, blooming in silence. And sometimes, late at night, we remember, even in history's driest deserts, something green once grew. Long before coins clinked and paper changed hands, people still traded. It was a world of barter, where goods met goods. A farmer swapped grain for fish. A potter traded jars for fabric. The system ran on need. But bartering had limits, and as villages became cities, those limits became cracks. Picture this. A shepherd owns 3 goats and wants salt. But the salt seller needs shoes, not goats. The deal dies. This is called the coincidence of wants, the problem of matching needs. In small towns, it worked. In growing cities, it failed. Bartering grew clumsy, slow, and unfit for complex economies. A new idea was needed. Something to hold value for everyone. The answer was a symbol, something durable, portable, trusted. Early societies chose what was hard to fake. In some, it was livestock. A goat might equal 10 jars of grain. In others, salt held power. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt rations. The word salary still carries the echo. Long before money jingled, it was measured in what people needed most: Other societies used tools and weapons as trade items. Polished stone axes or bronze blades weren't always meant to be used, but to be exchanged. These objects held value, not as tools, but as symbols. They weren't yet money, but they formed a bridge between barter and currency. They allowed people to assign abstract worth to physical goods and, more importantly, to carry value forward in time. Before coins or stamped silver, there was a deeper truth. Trade needed trust, and early currency was just a shared belief, not written on paper or struck in metal, but rooted in mutual need. As societies expanded and bartering grew too clumsy, people began to favor objects that everyone accepted, not because they were useful, but because they symbolized agreement. That shift was everything. It marked the birth of proto-currency. The earliest forms of money were humble yet powerful. Cowrie shells were among the most widespread. Smooth, small, and naturally beautiful. They came from the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They were easy to carry, hard to fake, and instantly recognizable. Cowries spread across Africa, China, and beyond, used in trade, tribute, and even in dowries. In some African kingdoms, cowries were stored in royal treasuries like modern banknotes. In China, bronze cowrie replicas were cast and circulated. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, silver was used, measured in lumps, not minted coins. Merchants carried scales to weigh silver in shekels, and contracts documented every amount. Though shapeless, silver held stable value in urban trade. Mesoamerican civilizations had their own currencies. The Aztecs used cacao beans, not just for chocolate, but as money. 10 beans could buy a rabbit, 100, a cloak. In the Philippines, before colonialism, gold rings and bars, called pilanchitos, were traded. In parts of Africa, iron tools like hoes or spears were exchanged, not for use, but for their recognized worth across markets. What united these early systems was a shift in mindset. Value no longer had to be immediate or personal. It could be symbolic. A small shell, a cacao bean, a metal ring could represent time, labor, or future need. Currency changed how people interacted. No longer tied to direct barter. Traders could now accept something valuable today and use it tomorrow for something entirely different. That shift opened new doors. Value could move. Trade could stretch farther. Money became a language, spoken in cowries, cacao, and silver lumps. But as societies grew and networks expanded, they needed more trust, more standardization. Cowries and weighed silver worked, but only to a point. The world needed something consistent, a token that everyone could recognize at a glance. That need led to a turning point, the rise of metal as money. Gold, silver, copper, and bronze were already traded for centuries. They were durable, rare, and could be reshaped without losing value. But they lacked uniformity. A silver lump had to be weighed, tested, and judged. What people needed next was form, something reliable, portable, and guaranteed by more than just weight. One region's silver might be trusted, another's might not. So ancient cultures began shaping metal into standard forms, such as bars, rings, and soon, coins. The breakthrough wasn't just in shape, it was in assurance. The coin became a promise. One of the earliest examples came from Lydia, a kingdom in modern-day Western Turkey. Around 600 BCE, they stamped metal with royal seals. These early Lydian coins were made of electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver. Each was stamped with symbols like lions, marking them as official. Their value wasn't just in weight, it came from the seal. That stamp meant legitimacy. For the first time, a coin wasn't just a chunk of metal. It was backed by a ruler, a city, or an empire. It carried both value and authority. People accepted coins not just for their shine or weight, but because they trusted others would do the same. Soon, the idea spread. Greek city-states, Persia, Rome, India, and China all developed coinage systems. Each coin became a tool of control, communication, and commerce. Kings stamped their faces onto them, not just for recognition, but for reach. Each exchange carried their image, their name, their power. In these stamped metals, money evolved into something more. It became a message. One that said, "This holds value because we all believe it does." The moment money became minted, authorized, and official, it changed everything. No longer just shaped metal, it was now currency, born of command. This began as early as the 7th century BCE and spread quickly through the ancient world. In Anatolia, the Lydians minted coins from electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver. These early coins bore no numbers, only the lion's head, symbol of King Aluatus. Their value came from weight and the royal stamp. Soon, Greek city-states followed, minting coins marked by local pride. Athens used owls. Aegina chose turtles. Corinth stamped Pegasus. Each coin was a promise sealed in metal. Greek coins were more than money. They were cultural artifacts, tiny carriers of myth, power, and identity. As they traveled between markets, they spread ideas alongside goods. Rulers began to see a deeper truth. Control the currency, and you control the people. With money, they could tax, trade, recruit, and rule. Currency had become both symbol and tool, and it changed everything. In Persia, King Darius I introduced the gold daric, stamped with his image holding a bow. It unified his vast empire from Egypt to India. In China, coins came in shapes like knives, spades, and round discs with square holes. Cast in bronze and marked by dynasties, they were strung on ropes and worn like wallets. Each form carried meaning, earth in the square, heaven in the circle. These shapes weren't random. They blended symbolism with function, and with them, coins gained new purpose. They weren't just for local trade but for distant exchange. Soldiers were paid in them, taxes collected, markets expanded, and with every stamped image, whether king, god, or beast, money spoke with authority. This is not just metal, this is law, this is order, this is power in your palm. Coins were no longer born of barter, they were born of rule. And no empire refined this system like Rome. For the Romans, money was empire made tangible. It moved through every layer of life. By the Republic era, Rome used bronze and silver coins. Later, gold entered as the empire grew richer. Roman currency became a tool, not only of economy, but of conquest, loyalty, and propaganda. Rome's first coins, like the rough bronze, were crude. But over time, coins became precise, weight-controlled, and widely recognized. The silver denarius emerged as Rome's backbone. Soldiers were paid in it. Civilians used it for goods and services. On one side stood gods or symbols of victory. On the other, the emperor's face, watching, reminding, asserting rule with every exchange. Each transaction became a moment of allegiance. The emperor's image passed hand to hand, from baker to taxman, a silent reminder of who ruled. Roman coins weren't just tools of trade. They were messengers of state. As the empire grew, it absorbed local currencies, reminting them under Roman authority. From Britain to Judea, a single monetary system brought order to distant lands. But even Rome felt strain. Wars, corruption, and rising costs led to debasement. Less silver, more filler. The denarius, once trusted, lost value. Prices rose, trust fell, inflation bloomed like rot. Yet the Roman currency system endured for centuries, because, even flawed, it carried the promise of empire. And until its last days, that promise echoed in every stamped and weathered coin. Roman coins traveled farther than Roman legions. They reached India, Scandinavia, and beyond. Not just tools of commerce, but emblems of empire. Buried in hoards, dropped in rivers, hidden in walls. And when the empire fell, the coins endured. Relics of a world that understood one powerful truth. To shape trade is to shape civilization. Control the coin, and you influence the world it touches. While Rome minted its empire in silver and bronze, Asia was crafting its own currencies, equally brilliant, often more enduring. In ancient China, early money took the form of tools, spades, knives, and bells. These weren't just shapes. They reflected agriculture, labor, and value. Coins spoke the language of everyday life, long before they took on the familiar round form we know today. As commerce expanded, China introduced round coins with square holes. They could be strung into long chains, worn at the waist, or hidden in walls. The shape held meaning, round for heaven, square for earth. Each coin became a cosmic symbol, uniting the spiritual with the practical. Currency here was more than metal. It was philosophy, stitched into every transaction. These coins were bronze, marked with inscriptions declaring their place and emperor. Unlike Roman coins, which changed with every ruler, Chinese coins remained consistent across dynasties. In that uniformity, people found stability. To the south, India developed its own distinct coinage, rooted in symbols of faith and nature, marking trade routes from the Silk Road to distant seaports. As early as the 6th century BCE, India circulated punch-marked silver coins, irregular in shape and stamped with suns, elephants, and sacred hills. These coins echoed the land's deep spirituality and diverse powers. At the same time, the Silk Road tied Asia together. Through deserts and cities, it carried silk, spices, porcelain, and coins. Each piece a story passed hand to hand. Chinese, Roman, and Persian coins all traveled the Silk Road, carried by traders, monks, and pilgrims. In Asia, money was more than a tool. It was ritual, belief, and identity. Some coins were never spent, only burned as offerings or buried with the dead. In every form, they whispered across generations, carrying meaning far beyond their metal. Empires rose and fell, but the coins remained, quiet echoes of vanished rulers. After 1,000 years of metal currency, a revolution began. Not in the West, but in China. There, among merchants and dynasties, a new idea took shape. Money didn't need to be heavy. It could be written. Trade could be carried not in bags of silver, but in slips of promise, folded and inked. Paper money began with the Tang dynasty in the 7th century. At first, it wasn't official. Merchants issued promissory notes to avoid carrying coins across long roads. Instead of hauling metal, travelers carried paper backed by a trusted source. These notes promised silver at the journey's end. Simple, practical, and revolutionary. Soon, the government took interest. By the 11th century, during the Song dynasty, China issued the world's first official paper currency, called jiaozi. These notes bore seals, expiration dates, and intricate patterns to prevent fraud. Light, portable, and efficient, they transformed large-scale trade. This innovation arrived centuries before paper money reached Europe. China had created money you could fold. While Europe still dealt in coins, China was trading with bark-stamped slips of mulberry. But paper brought new risks. Coins held inherent value. They were metal. Paper held only a promise. Its worth depended on trust, not in silver, but in government. This shift changed the nature of money forever. And with it came a new threat: inflation. A danger that still shadows us today. In times of crisis or overprinting, paper money could lose value fast. Yet the idea endured. Under Mongol rule, the Yuan dynasty spread paper currency across its vast empire. Some notes bore multiple languages. When Marco Polo arrived in the 13th century, he was stunned. Kublai Khan's paper notes held the weight of gold. To European eyes, it was alchemy. Paper transformed into power. But the Chinese had discovered something timeless. Money wasn't a thing. It was a belief. A shared trust, printed and passed hand to hand. As trade routes expanded and commerce became more complex, carrying coins or paper grew risky. Merchants needed safety, a way to store value and move wealth across mountains and oceans without hauling sacks of silver on their backs. Out of that need came a revolution. The bank. Ancient forms existed in Mesopotamia and Greece. But it was during the Islamic Golden Age and the Italian Renaissance that banking matured. In cities like Baghdad, Cairo, Florence, and Venice, merchant families began offering loans, deposits, and letters of credit. Money moved not through soldiers, but through scribes, ink, and quiet power. A trader in Cairo could deposit gold, receive a credit note, and redeem it in Damascus. Banks made distance irrelevant. Families like the Medici financed voyages, cities, even wars. They didn't just hold wealth. They moved it, shaped it, and sometimes ruled with it. The core idea was simple yet radical. Money didn't need to exist physically. A promise was enough. A promise written in a ledger could be borrowed, traded, or grown. This birthed credit, the belief that future payment would come. Trust replaced weight. Entire markets began running not on coins, but confidence. Banks issued letters, records, and loans. And soon, money wasn't carried. It flowed. Wealth could now outrun ships and caravans. It lived in numbers, not in sacks. You didn't need gold to be rich. You just needed to be trusted. And with credit came risk. Debts unpaid. Markets overinflated. Wealth made of air. But money had changed again. From metal to symbol to idea. Coins were no longer enough. What mattered now was belief. Money wasn't just held in hand. It was imagined, calculated, and expected. A line in a book held more power than a vault of silver. Today, when you tap your phone to buy coffee, no coin changes hands. No bill is passed. Just numbers dancing between servers. The payment is real. The exchange happens. But nothing physical moves. This is the era of invisible money. Currency has become code. What began as shells and silver now lives in encrypted signals and glowing screens. Digital banking, online payments, central bank digital currencies. These are not the future. They are the present. Cash is fading. Your bank balance lives on a server you'll never see, updated in real time. It can vanish with a glitch or grow with a click. Money now moves at light speed, across borders, through firewalls, into stocks and startups. Weightless, borderless, formless, and then came cryptocurrency. A currency with no king, no central bank, just math. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others live only in code, tracked by decentralized ledgers called blockchains, verified by thousands of independent users. They exist without vaults or borders. And yet, they buy houses, cars, and art. The leap from grain and goats to cryptographic tokens is vast. But the heart remains, because money, in any age, is trust. Whether stamped in bronze, printed on bark, or strung together in lines of code. It only works if we believe it does. It's a contract whispered across centuries, from barter to blockchain. The future may be contactless, cashless, and invisible, but it still carries echoes of cowrie shells, silver scales, and ledgers scratched into clay beneath ancient skies. No matter how modern it becomes, money remains a story, not just of numbers, but of trust, belief, and the need to assign value to the invisible. And in the golden haze of Greek legend, no figure shines brighter than Helen of Troy, said to be born of Zeus. Not from a woman, but from an egg, her beauty was unmatched. So divine, so dangerous, that men once went to war over her name. Whole kingdoms bled for her. Helen was queen of Sparta, married to King Menelaus when Paris, a young Trojan prince, arrived. Some say he stole her. Others claim she left willingly. Either way, when his ship vanished beyond the horizon, the world tilted. Menelaus, betrayed and furious, invoked a vow all of Helen's suitors had sworn to defend her marriage, no matter who won her hand. Under banners of vengeance, Greece united. Kings gathered their ships, among them Agamemnon, High King of Mycenae, Odysseus, the cunning mind of Ithaca, Achilles, the half-divine warrior fated for glory. They sailed for Troy, a proud, wealthy city with towering walls. For 10 years, battles raged. Heroes fell, gods chose sides, and the war became legend long before it ended. Zeus and Hera, Apollo and Athena turned the war into divine theatre. The death of Patroclus, Achilles' wrath, Hector's fall, and the trick of the wooden horse. This is the myth, an epic of pride, love, and ruin. But what of truth? For centuries, scholars believed it fiction. A beautiful lie sung by Homer, centuries after the war. Yet beneath the poetry lies something persistent, something real. Troy was not a fantasy, it existed. In the late 19th century, a German archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann claimed to have found it. Layers of ruins beneath a hill in modern-day Turkey. So now, the question is not whether Troy stood. It is whether a war was fought there. Was there a Helen, a Paris, an Achilles? To find answers, we must brush aside poetry and dig into Bronze Age soil. Centuries after Troy's fall, a blind poet named Homer shaped the legend. His Iliad, composed in the 8th century BCE, became a cornerstone of Greek identity. But he wasn't writing history. He preserved memory, molded by storytellers before him. The Iliad does not begin with Helen's abduction. It begins with Achilles' rage. Months into the war, when gods still walked among men. Gods fight. Heroes duel. The Greeks are not mere men. They are mythic, yet heartbreakingly human, in pride, sorrow, and courage. Homer never claimed to witness the war. He lived nearly 5 centuries later. Yet his knowledge of Bronze Age armor, customs, and tactics is uncanny. Too specific to be guessed. Scholars believe he drew from oral tradition, kept alive by generations of singers. That tradition outlived Homer. The Odyssey followed the war's aftermath. Other poems, now lost or broken, told of Achilles' death, Troy's fall, and the sack of the city. Together, they formed the epic cycle. To ancient Greeks, these weren't fairy tales. They were memory, legends anchored in identity. Kings traced their bloodlines to heroes. Cities claimed roots in Troy's ashes. The Trojan War became a cultural inheritance. Poets repeated its verses. Sculptors carved its battles. But was Homer describing history? Or had centuries of storytelling inflated a skirmish into a cosmic tragedy? That question lingers like smoke, because memory, like myth, expands. And between fire and fantasy, truth often flickers. Yet something happened on that Aegean shore, and that brings us to a quiet hill in Turkey, where ruins sleep beneath sun and soil. For centuries, Troy was called a myth, a dream conjured by Homer's pen. But in the 1870s, Heinrich Schliemann set out to prove otherwise. Lacking formal training, but burning with belief, he dug into the mound of Hisarlik, and there, he claimed, he found Troy, not in verses, but in stone. Guided by Homer's verses, Heinrich Schliemann set his sights on a mound in northwestern Turkey, called Hisarlik. To the untrained eye, it was just a hill. But beneath the soil lay buried cities, layer upon layer of ancient life. Not one Troy, but many. Schliemann began digging with haste and little care. He passed Roman and Hellenistic ruins, pushing deeper in search of Homer's lost city. There, he claimed to find Priam's treasure, golden jewelry, ornaments, and vessels. He even dressed his wife in the jewels for a photograph, declaring them royal. It was romantic, but flawed. Modern archaeologists later determined that he dug too deep. The layer he called Troy dated to 2500 BCE, far too old. The real city of Homer, if it existed, would lie just above, in layers 6 and 7. In those Bronze-aged layers, dating from 1300 to 1200 BCE, researchers found thick walls, tall towers, and charred remains. In layer 7, they uncovered arrowheads, sling stones, and shattered buildings, signs of siege or sudden collapse. Could this have been the Troy of legend? Some think so. Others remain skeptical. Not everyone agrees it was war. Some believe it was earthquake or civil unrest. And yet, the city of Hisarlik is now widely accepted as historical Troy. A powerful trading hub linking the Aegean and the East. A city worth fighting for. Perhaps the war was real, though not exactly as Homer sang it. No wooden horse, no 10-year siege, but enough truth to ignite 3,000 years of storytelling. And that kind of truth often survives longer than facts. If Troy was real, it needed an enemy. In myth, that enemy was a league of Greek kings. In history, they likely came from Mycenaean Greece. The Mycenaeans dominated the mainland during the Late Bronze Age. From 1600 to 1100 BCE, they left behind palaces, tablets, and tombs filled with gold, weapons, and painted scenes of war. This was no gentle age. Their world was shaped by conquest. The grandest palace stood at Mycenae, seat of King Agamemnon. Not poetic, but military. Its walls were thick, its gates lion-carved. Warriors were buried with blades and bronze. Their art showed chariots and armies, not gods or lovers. Mycenaean society was structured, powerful, and built for battle. Unlike the fractured city-states of later Greece, these were kingdoms with rulers and records. They weren't alone. Mycenaean pottery reached Egypt, Cyprus, the Levant, and even the shores near Troy. They were sailors, traders, and at times, invaders. Conflict with Troy would not have been fantasy. It would have been business. Control over western Anatolia and the vital trade routes was a prize worth blood. And if they fought, it was not for love. It was for power. In Linear B, their early script, we find records of weapons, tribute, and taxation. Inventories list shields, swords, and armor stored in palaces. There is no mention of Helen or Paris. No word of Troy by name. But the texts reveal a world built for war. A world where raids were common and alliances fragile. In such a world, a siege across the sea would not have been unusual. So perhaps the war was never about a woman at all. Perhaps it was trade, ambition, and timing. A Mycenaean expedition against a rival city like Troy would need no divine excuse. Only strategy and strength. Maybe they did sail. Maybe they fought. And maybe, as the tale passed through centuries, the war became poetry. 1,000 ships turned into metaphor. A raid became a myth. To understand Troy, we must understand those who told its story. The Greeks of the classical age didn't separate myth from memory. To them, Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, and Helen were real. The Trojan War was their origin, their heritage. In the Iliad, gods walk the battlefield. They don't watch from afar. They intervene, twist fate, and fight beside mortals. And the war becomes divine. Aphrodite shields Paris. Athena guides Achilles. Zeus weighs the scales of fate. These weren't just metaphors, they were beliefs. The gods were seen as active forces, unpredictable and emotional, woven into the threads of daily life. Yet behind the divine pageantry lie deeply human tales of rage, pride, and grief. Achilles is more than a warrior. He's a man broken by loss. Hector isn't just Troy's shield. He's a father who knows he's doomed. Hector's story is tragic because he fights knowing he'll lose. His courage feels real because it's rooted in family, not fate. These myths endure because their emotions are timeless. But are they history? There's no firm archaeological trace of Achilles or Helen. No record of Priam or Paris. Yet, the name Alexandros, another title for Paris, does appear in Anatolian texts. And the Bronze Age world certainly knew kings, warriors, and shifting alliances. So what seems likely is this. If a war occurred, its heroes were not radiant demigods in bronze, but hard-edged leaders fighting over trade and pride. Their deeds were messy and human, but memory softened their edges. Through centuries of retelling, their stories grew taller. Myth wasn't about facts, it was about meaning. The tale of Troy was not a report, it was a reflection. A narrative carved to shape how the Greeks saw themselves. The Trojan War became a mirror of Greek values, courage, honor, tragedy. It endured because it captured more than truth. It captured belief. And if one moment defines the myth, it's the fall of Troy. At its heart lies the greatest trick in Western storytelling. The Trojan horse, a tale so enduring, it outlived the city it destroyed. A story of deception wrapped in reverence, told again and again for thousands of years. According to later sources, most famously Virgil's Aeneid, the Greeks, exhausted after 10 years, feigned retreat. They left a giant wooden horse at Troy's gates, claiming it was a gift to the gods. The Trojans, eager to believe the war was over, dragged it inside as a trophy. That night, as the city slept, Greek soldiers hidden within emerged, opened the gates, and welcomed their returning army. Troy burned. Temples collapsed. People fled or died. King Priam was cut down at the altar. The once mighty city crumbled in a single night. It's a haunting tale, but did it happen? Excavations at Troy 7 show destruction by fire. Around 1180 BCE, walls collapsed. Habitation ended abruptly. The timeline fits. But there's no sign of a giant horse. No carved record of trickery. Only silence. And ash. Perhaps the horse was never built. Maybe it symbolized something else. A siege engine. A natural disaster. A betrayal. Some scholars think the story was a poetic metaphor for collapse. Others believe it never existed, born instead from the need to give the war a clever ending. Whatever the truth, the horse endures. Not as fact, but as symbol. A warning, a legend. A doorway into the end of an age. For after Troy's fall, other cities soon followed. Ugarit, Mycenae, Hattusa, gone within decades. Trade networks vanished. Languages disappeared. The Bronze Age buckled under weight it could no longer carry. The The Trojan War may not have caused the collapse, but it came at the end of something. And that makes it more than a tale of heroes. It makes it the echo of a dying world. The fall of Troy was not the end. It was a beginning. In its ashes rose centuries of myth. The story lived on, told in poems, plays, and temples. Its aftermath spread far. Odysseus wandered for 10 more years. Others faced darker fates. Troy's burning sparked new legends. And through them, a new world was born. Less golden, more uncertain, but forever shaped by that fabled war and its haunted survivors. Homer's Odyssey follows Odysseus, adrift in storms, battling monsters, yearning for home. His tale is about the long cost of victory. Agamemnon, the war's leader, was murdered upon return. Ajax, shamed, took his own life. Menelaus brought Helen home, but theirs was no joyful reunion. Some said it was cold, distant, built not on love, but on memory. The war had ended, but peace never truly returned. And then there was Aeneas, a Trojan prince who, according to Roman myth, escaped the burning city with his father and young son. His journey, told by Virgil in the Aeneid, led him across the Mediterranean through storms and war until he reached Italy. There, he was said to become the forefather of Rome. This wasn't just a heroic tale, it was carefully shaped political mythology meant to anchor an empire in divine ancestry. By claiming descent from Trojan survivors, the Romans linked themselves to the age of heroes, suggesting they were born not from barbarians, but from the ashes of a sacred past. In this way, Troy became more than a Greek memory. It became a shared myth. Cities across the ancient world claimed Trojan founders. Kings boasted of Trojan blood. Everyone wanted to stand in the shadow of a legend that spoke of endurance, loss, and rebirth. So what does that tell us about the war itself? Maybe that its significance was never just in the fighting. Troy, whether fact or fiction, became a symbol. It stood for glory and grief, collapse and survival. Civilizations turned to its myth to explain their origins, to lend themselves legitimacy. For the ancient world, Troy wasn't merely a city. It marked the border between memory and myth, between what was and what could never fully be known. As centuries passed, the Trojan War became more than poetry. It became a political tool. In Athens and Sparta, playwrights and philosophers reimagined the war to explore identity. Helen and Menelaus were no longer just lovers or victims. In the hands of Euripides, they became reflections of a nation's pride and doubt. Some plays questioned whether the war was about love at all, or if that was simply a mask worn by greed and wounded pride. In these retellings, the war was a mirror. The anger of Achilles resembled political rage. The fall of Troy became a warning about arrogance and vengeance. Greek democracy used myth to explore its own contradictions. Later, the Romans reshaped the tale again, this time casting themselves not as the Greeks, but as the Trojans. In doing so, they shifted the myth from victory to survival, from conquerors to the noble remnants of a ruined world. Julius Caesar claimed his lineage traced back to Aeneas, and by extension to Venus herself. This wasn't historical fact. It was myth wielded like a crown, a narrative forged for power. Even in the modern world, the Trojan War lives on. Painters, poets, and filmmakers continue to return to it. Achilles becomes a broken hero. Helen becomes complex and conflicted. Odysseus shifts from cunning leader to cold manipulator. The myth bends, but it never breaks. Each new version reflects its own era. But always, the burning city by the sea remains at the center. Troy, more dream than place, more memory than fact. It's the stage where pride and fate collide, where love ignites wars and heroes fall alone. Myth, in the end, isn't just a story, it's a mirror. It doesn't show us the past as it was. It shows us what we believe about ourselves. That's why Troy endures. It gives shape to grief. It gives meaning to struggle. It reminds us that even in ruin, something can survive. Whether true or imagined, the Trojan War persists, not because we can prove it, but because we feel it. It speaks to something old in us, the need to make sense of pain, to transform it into story. In asking whether it really happened, we reveal more about ourselves than about history. We're not just looking for facts, we're searching for meaning. We may never find Helen's footprints or Achilles' armor. No grave has yielded proof of Paris or Priam, and yet the story calls to us, not because it's precise, but because it's powerful, because it captures how memory survives, not in stone, but in sorrow, in pride, in the longing to be remembered. The details may blur, shift, or vanish, but something remains. Something was fought for, something was lost, and something was carried forward in song. There was a city, there was a war, and from it came a story so vast it shaped the dreams of nations. Today, most scholars believe the Trojan War, if it occurred, was not a single siege, but a series of conflicts over trade, power, or pride. Troy may not have fallen to a wooden horse, but to fire and ambition. Still, the myth refuses to fade. And perhaps that's because the truth of Troy doesn't live in ruins. It lives in memory and myth, side by side. One is archaeological, buried in earth, in pottery shards and broken ramparts. The other is emotional, carried in verses, in songs, and in dreams. The poet, Homer, whoever he truly was, understood this better than anyone. His words gave us a version of the war that transcends time. His Troy was not just a city. It was a stage for all human drama. Love and loss, glory and ruin, the things that make us ache and remember. So, did the Trojan War really happen? Yes and no. Not in the way we imagine, but not wholly imagined either. It is part truth, part memory, part mirror. And in the space where those overlap, legends are born. Troy may have burned. Its walls may have crumbled. But its story endures, not because it is perfect, but because it still speaks to the fire we carry inside. If you made it this far, you're the real one. As always, my friends, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to like, subscribe, and drift back next time for more quiet tales from the shadows of history. For now, I'll leave you with the soft crackle of the campfire. May it guide you gently into rest, and keep your dreams safe and still.